All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining us. My name is Cheryl, and I'm an adult services librarian at the Westland Public Library. For those of you who are not familiar with Westland, it is a suburb of Portland, Oregon. For those of you who are patrons of our library, I just want to let you know that we'll be expanding our hours starting Tuesday, July 6th, and you can check our website for details on that. Just a reminder to please keep yourselves muted with your video off during this presentation. We will have time for Q&A at the end, so feel free to put your questions in the chat box anytime. Tonight we have Lisa Holmes, who is a graphic designer and guidebook author based in Portland, Oregon. When she is not designing websites and marketing materials for clients, she's diving deep into the details of planning backpacking trips all over the beautiful Pacific Northwest. Combining her photography, map, and book design skills with a desire to share her journey with others has led her to creating books about the landscapes she loves. She has self-published 3 hiking books so far, with more on the way. I Heart Backpacking is her most recent book, and the library does own it if you'd like to check it out before buying a copy at Powell's or Amazon. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks for having me give this presentation. I love talking about backpacking, and I love sharing knowledge with other people so that more people can get out there. In this presentation, I'll be going over just a little bit about me and then the book that Cheryl just showed you. Talk about why I go backpacking, some common fears, essential skills, trip planning and gear, backpacking food, common backpacking mistakes, and a few trip ideas. So I'm Lisa Deep Dive Holmes. Deep Dive is my trail name, and it comes from the way that I spend so much time planning trips and really do a deep dive on that. I'm a graphic designer and guidebook author. This is my graphic design company, Uland Studio. I design websites and publications, and I do custom maps for clients. And this is my blog, I Heart Pacific Northwest. Here I have trip reports on all of my hikes and backpacking trips, and sections on gear, skills, and backpacking food, as well as info on my books, and a blog is on here. So this is the latest book that I just published called I Heart Backpacking, How to Get Started. And this book is half how-to. So it's got info on backpacking gear, all the different kinds of gear that you need for backpacking. And then it's got a big section on skills that covers quite a bit. These are pages from the book. And then I have 10 different trips in the book. And each one looks something like this, where you get a trip plan with info about a hike in and potential day hikes from camp. And then maps. This is something that I really specialize in since I'm a designer and I design a lot of maps for clients. So this is one of my big focuses in my books, are making maps that are really easy to read and understand, and in this case have a full trip plan all lined out for you. And this can be purchased at Powell's, Next Adventure, or on Amazon, or you can purchase directly from me and save $5 with this code IHeartPNW, all caps. So why go backpacking? This was me not long after I moved to Oregon in 2007. I had never really hiked in my life. I'd never camped. I didn't even know what backpacking was. And I'm getting ready to do a hike at Waukena Falls. And I wasn't really sure what I was getting into. And eventually I got to where I really liked it a lot. But at first I didn't really know what I was doing. And so I show this because I think it's important to see that anybody can go backpacking, even somebody who until 6 years ago, I used to say, I will never be a backpacker because I didn't think I could really handle it. I felt like all of the resources that I'd seen on backpacking were what I call pretty hardcore. So they had things you could do that were a lot of miles, like going all the way around a mountain with crazy amount of elevation gain and all that stuff. And I just couldn't see myself doing that because I had just gotten into hiking when I moved here, and I didn't really do big miles and didn't do crazy hard stuff. So it's something I never thought I would do, but eventually I just wanted to spend more time in the places that I was hiking to. and get to spend more time just relaxing, like here at Suisun Creek, which was my very first backpacking trip. I chose something really easy that I was pretty familiar with. I'd hiked here many times, but I'd never backpacked. So I had a friend of mine take me on a super easy. We only went in about 2 miles and spent one night, but it got me to where I felt like I could do it, and I just wanted to keep going and do it again. And so another one that I did that first year was Mount Jefferson, another area I had hiked many times but had never backpacked, and it was just really a whole nother experience getting to spend so much time in this place that was so special. And when you do a hike and you go in and then you spend maybe 15 minutes to an hour at your destination, and then you turn around and leave, and it just wasn't enough. So I wanted to explore more, and I wanted to go to places like, this is at Shai Beach in Washington, that were really way too far for a day hike, way too involved to get up there just to spend some time on this beach. And by backpacking, I got to spend several days there, and it was a really great experience. Or other places where I might hike, like to Burnt Lake, seen in the photo, and then when you're backpacking, you have a chance to go hike farther than I would typically do on a day hike. Or places like this in the North Cascades. Over time, I got more and more comfortable with backpacking and ended up going to places that I never thought I would be at a place like this. And so it just really opened up whole new worlds for me that I was really happy to discover. Another one is like Spectacle Lake. Trips like this are one that it's like 10 miles to get into this lake. And so I would split this up and hike in just about halfway and spend the night, and then get up and move camp the next day, and then spend a couple of days here. And again, that's something I wouldn't be doing day hiking, because that would be a 20-mile day and you wouldn't have much time there. So that has a lot to do with why I like to go backpacking. This is probably my favorite campsite I have ever stayed at ever, in the North Cascades on Copper Ridge. Surrounded in all directions by mountains. It was pretty incredible. And I've even tried some winter snow camping. I've done it 4 times, which was plenty for me to discover that I don't really like it that much, but it was fun and looks cool, but it's really cold. A lot of people love it, but I think as you backpack, you kind of learn what you like and what you don't like. And for me, I'd rather see places without all the snow. For me, honestly, one of the biggest reasons I go backpacking is to spend time with friends. I lead trips for all of my friends, and we go quite a few times every year. And for me, the social aspect of backpacking is a really big part of why I love it so much. The shared experience, the helping each other out, just it's like nothing else that I'd done before with friends. So that has a lot to do with it for me too. So after just 6 years, I've gone on over 55 trips, and I feel like it's really changed me as a person. I feel like I have a lot more strength and confidence than I ever had before. And I really believe that backpacking has a lot to do with that. So now we'll go over some common fears, some of the reasons that people are afraid to get into backpacking. And some of these were mine. Um, Wildlife is a big one for people. And usually when they think of wildlife, they think of bears and cougars. So what I like to say is to really consider the statistics regarding encounters with wildlife that are bad. And it really doesn't happen that often. And it's not something that I really worry about. I think if you do things like store your food properly and don't approach animals and just in general be smart about things, then really it isn't going to be an issue for you. I've only ever seen a bear one time on a trip, and it was pretty up close, within 10 feet. And it did change how I felt about bears completely, because this bear had no interest in me. It just wanted to eat berries, and it stayed there. It didn't just run off right away. So we just kind of backed off and let it have its way, and then it left and we moved on, and it was no big deal. But I know that it can be a concern, of course, if you run into a cub and a mama bear. That's a bit different. But again, if you consider the stats in terms of how often do things happen that hurt people, then it's so rare that it's really not something to worry about. Sketchy people. This is one I've actually never worried about and never had an incident. So again, I would say consider the stats. I think one of the problems is that whenever something bad does happen, it makes the news and it just kind of blows up in the news, and it makes it seem like this is something that happens all the time, but it really doesn't. I think if you're smart and you do things like don't camp too close to roads, the farther in you go, the bad guys, they're not out there wanting to like have to work really hard and hike in a long ways to get you. So I think that that's something that I just don't really worry about. But I will say to definitely listen to your instincts. If something really rubs you the wrong way and you need to just turn around and leave, then by all means you should do that, just to stay safe. But again, this is something I don't really worry about that much. Sleeping in the wild. I did worry about that. I wondered if I would be able to sleep. And the good news is I don't have any problem with that at all. I do have friends who struggle with that more. And so they might use earplugs or their headphones just for a little bit until they can fall asleep. But I think that having a really comfortable sleep system helps with that a lot. If you're really comfortable, then you're going to be more likely to fall asleep easier. And again, not that much happens. So there's not that much to worry about. Using the bathroom is a really big one for a lot of people. To start with, I think you should check the regulations for the area you'll be in, because some places have different rules about how they want you to deal with human waste. But for the most part, most places you'll be digging a cat hole away from water, trails, and camps. And I think if you build a nice bathroom kit, then it'll make the whole process a lot easier. I have a blog post about that on my site, how to use the bathroom in the backcountry. And I go over what's in my bathroom kit and show like what a cat hole looks like when you dig it, and other info like that. So this turned out to not really be a big deal at all for me. It's maybe, yeah, it might be a little bit of work to dig a hole, but it's no big deal when you got the right stuff to deal with it. So now I'll go over some of the skills that I think are essential for backpackers to know. Number one, I would say, is navigation. Definitely don't want to be getting lost out there. And I think it's really important to learn how to read topo maps. There's some good articles online about that. You can just kind of Google that and find some really good things to teach you about how to read the contour lines on a topo map. And there's some great apps out there. I like to use Gaia, and I'll show you a screen from that. So whenever I do a backpacking trip, I like to make custom maps for my trip using CalTopo. There's a lot of other resources out there, but this is my favorite one. And in this one, in yellow is shown like the first day, and then we get to the campsite we're going to stay out the first day, and then in orange was the second day, and then purple was a day hike that we did, and I show where the different camp areas are. This is really great to print for everybody in your group, so everybody has a map. And I think it's important to not just have the map, but to really study the map ahead of time and get familiar with it before you go. And then I also really like to use Gaia, which is an app available for both iOS and for Android. I like to track all of my hikes while I'm out there, and it just helps me see where I'm at on the trail. But I don't overly rely on this, because any electronic can fail at any time without notice. And so it's really great to still have that paper map to refer back to whenever you need it. So I highly recommend that you always have one of those and know how to read it. Physical preparation. I think the best prep for backpacking is hiking. It's all the same movements. The difference is really just the weight on your back. And so I think it's important to test wearing a fully loaded pack, and maybe to prep on a hike, maybe take an extra 5 pounds one time, and then maybe take an extra 10 pounds another time, just to kind of get used to carrying the weight. Another idea is to do hikes multiple days in a row, just so you're used to like moving on a regular basis, because a lot of backpacking is about hiking every day. And so actually doing hikes for several days in a row will help prepare you for that too. And then I'd also say to make sure you seek treatment for any physical issues beforehand, because if they bother you before you go backpacking, then they'll probably bother you more while you're doing it. Like, for example, ankle or knee issues or things like that. So it's important to get those dealt with beforehand, because you don't want to have it get worse for you while you're having to carry more on your back. First aid. I think that knowing how to use a first aid kit and knowing what to do in an emergency situation is really important. So I highly recommend that everybody who backpacks takes a wilderness first aid class. I've done this a couple of times, both through RAI, and they have NOLS, the National Outdoor Leadership School. They are the teachers of the curriculum for the courses. It's really good training. The ones that I did were you spend 2 days, I think 8 hours, 2 days, and about half the time in the class is spent on lectures and half the time is practicing situations where you'll have to be a victim or somebody else will be, and then you'll have to do some assessing. And most of the stuff that they teach you isn't about treatment. It's more about assessing situations and knowing what to do in the situations, because you're never going to be expected to actually be a doctor or a nurse out there, but at least being able to deal with some basic things will really help you a lot. And trip planning. I like to do a deep dive on all of my research and planning. I believe that this leads to a lot fewer problems when you're out there. The more that you plan ahead, then I feel the better off you are. I know some people feel like that takes away from the experience a little bit, but I'm okay with not having those bad experiences because I didn't plan well enough. So this is how I like to approach it. And I have a 10-step planning process that I have fully outlined on my website. It includes all of these different elements that I feel are important for trip planning. And this is where that post is, my 10-step process for planning a backpacking trip. It's also in the book. I believe in planning your own plan. If you've ever heard the terms hike your own hike, this is really similar. And what I mean by this is make sure that you're planning a trip based on your own needs and your own interests and capabilities, and not just seeing what somebody else does who maybe has different capabilities than you do and just taking it from there. Instead, I really think that it's good to plan things according to what you want to do. And then if you're doing that with a group, to make sure that everybody's on the same plan, that everybody understands and has the same expectations, and then things I think will go a lot better. These are some of the things I like to consider when I'm doing a trip plan is your backpacking style. And I like to look at the time you like to spend at camp versus the number of miles you like to hike, because this will have a big impact on the type of trip that you plan. So if you're somebody who only wants to hike in a couple of miles, or maybe like 5 miles or so, and then you're going to have plenty of time at camp, that's a completely different kind of trip than somebody who basically plans to hike all day long until it's like dinner time before they set up camp. That's just going to be a different kind of trip. And so I think that's really important to keep in mind when you're planning a trip. Also, the type of route you plan to do. I tend to do base camp trips the most, which is shown on the left, where you hike in, set up camp, and then you do day hikes from there. But I've also done some loops where you change camp at different locations to complete a loop. And then a shuttle is another type that I actually haven't done, mainly just because of the logistics involved with getting vehicles from one trailhead to another. But that is also a really popular method for backpacking, all of which will impact your trip plan quite a bit. And then also consider the level of difficulty that you want to do, the number of miles and the amount of elevation gain, as well as the trail conditions. Like, is it a really steep and rocky trail, or is it a pretty easy tread? What kinds of things are you going to have to deal with, like stream crossings that'll make it more difficult, etc. Keep all of that in mind when you're coming up with your trip plan. Okay, gear. We'll talk just a little bit about some gear for backpacking. This is my current setup that is shown in this photo. And again, I believe in gearing your own gear. And what I mean is, don't just copy what somebody else has. Even, your friends or me or anybody else. I think it's important to get gear that fits you for what you want and what you need. These are some of the basics that everybody needs for backpacking. The big three are commonly referred to are the backpack, your shelter, and your sleep system. These are going to be the three heaviest and biggest items in your pack for the most part. And And then things like kitchen gear, so backpacking stove and cookware, and even food storage, water treatment, and a way to store water, and then all of these additional items as well. Things to really keep in mind when you're looking at buying gear is where you fall in this trifecta of cost versus comfort versus weight. Because there is no such thing as the least expensive, most comfortable, lightest weight gear. As much as we would all love that, that doesn't really exist. I think it's a lot more likely if you really have a low budget, then you might end up with gear that's a little bit heavier and potentially less comfortable. It's not always true, but just in general. And if you're going for really lightweight, it's definitely going to be more expensive. Ultralight gear just costs more. It costs more to produce. The materials cost more. Sometimes it can be less comfortable. A lot of ultralight hikers will go without things, and so they're willing to forego comfort in order to have less weight on their back. And then for people who are really into comfort, it's pretty much it's going to be a bit heavier and probably more expensive, although not always. And then the thing that I pay attention to the most is weight, because I wish I'd carry more on my back is something that no one ever says. So things to keep in mind regarding your weight are your base weight, which is everything carried except consumables, which are food, water, and fuel. And that gives you a good idea for where you're at once you do have your gear. Ultralight gear for a base weight is considered to be 10 pounds or less. Lightweight is 20 pounds or less, and traditional is 30 pounds or less. Mine falls in the lightweight range, even though I have a lot of ultralight gear. I also carry items like a 3-pound camera with me and a 1-pound backpack and chair. And so there's no way I'm ever getting into the ultralight zone because I'd have to forego too much, for me, comfort. So if you hear these terms, this is basically what they're talking about. And the ideal amount of weight you should carry based on your own body weight, and this of course is really general and it varies a lot based on your own conditioning, and a lot, and your age and various other things, but ideally including your food, water, and fuel, you'll be carrying no more than 20 to 25% of your body weight. If you're really small like me, that's pretty tough. I'm definitely more on the 25% end because I just can't get it down to any less than that for the most part. But I'm emphasizing weight because of how much impact it has on your body when you are carrying gear. And so this is something I've discovered in the time that I've been backpacking, and this is what I started out with. And I've replaced almost everything shown here. I'm trying to think if there's anything I still have. In general, I'd say that most of my items were just heavy versions of things. And so I replaced them with lighter weight versions of similar things. But I'd also say I have way too many clothing items over there. So that's something I don't carry that much of anymore. And I have replaced things, and now I've gotten down to about a base weight of about 18 pounds. And like I said, that includes 3 pounds for a camera and a pound backpack and chair. Otherwise, I think it's a pretty good base weight for me. It works pretty well for me, and I'm pretty happy with it. It did cost a lot to go through this process, and so that's why I'm emphasizing if you're going to go purchase gear. I thought I was paying attention to weight, but I wasn't paying enough attention because I ended up carrying like 35, 36 pounds before, and it just about did me in. It's just was way, way too much for my body to handle. And so I definitely can handle this a lot more. And I wish I'd known that when I'd started buying things, because I would have spent a lot less money overall. But I did learn over time. And I have a lot more info about gear on my website, including my entire gear list on my website with links to everything if anyone is interested in that. And then backpacking food. Yeah, this is something everybody, we all love to eat, but backpacking food can be an issue for people who struggle to eat when they backpack, like me. And I'll talk about that as we go through this. So I'll talk about the different types of backpacking food. There's basically 3 different types. The most popular by far are commercial freeze-dried meals that you find at outdoor retailers. They do tend to be a bit expensive, have a limited selection of flavors, and to me, most of them have a lot of preservatives, and I don't really care for them, but I have a lot of friends who love them, so I think it's all just personal taste. I just know that if I had to eat this kind of food, I probably wouldn't do as well on trips because if I don't like it, I won't eat it. And this is what some of the commercial food selection is at Next Adventure in Portland. And then another option are DIY grocery store things like pasta and rice sides or couscous mixes, instant mashed potatoes, instant stuffing, ramen. I think almost everyone's eaten ramen on a backpacking trip. These things are readily available. They're less expensive than freeze-dried meals, but they still have a lot of preservatives and don't work for everybody. So this is what I do. I make all of my own dehydrated meals. I can tailor them to my own taste. It's definitely healthier. I try to eat organic food as much as I can, and this is something I'm able to control by making my own. It definitely takes more time, though. It helps if you're somebody who likes to cook and put things together. And I like to save money, and also it saves weight because my own meals tend to weigh a lot less than other meals, and they're less bulky, so they don't take up as much space in my pack. I'm currently working on a new backpacking cookbook with a friend, and hopefully that'll be out in the next couple of months. But we've got I think about 45 recipes in there for making your own food. And then I also have some of my recipes on my website at this location. For meal planning, for trips, I like to create a list of the number of meals that I need for the trip, and then I sort things out on a table, and I take a little extra just in case. So this is me putting down everything I'm going to take, and you could just write this. It doesn't have to be a fancy spreadsheet or table or anything, but it just really helps me if I lay it out like this, so I can see, like, I don't need breakfast on the first day, I don't need dinner on the last day, and this is how many I need of everything. And then this is what I mean by laying it out on the table. I kind of put things in columns or rows by day. And then this really gives me a good visual sense of how much food I have. I also like to repackage things so that I don't have big bags of anything where you can't really tell like how much you've got because it's in a big bag. And so I'll separate things out into individual portions whenever I can. And then on the right is shown my my Ursack bear bag, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And then I like to put my meals in different Ziploc bags for dinners, lunches, breakfast, and then carry a bag for carrying out trash. It helps to stay organized. So you're not having to dump out the whole thing and sort through everything every time you need to get some food. So food storage, again, this is something that you're definitely going to need check regulations on because some places will require, for example, a bear canister to be used for storing your food. Generally, that's in national parks around here. And you also need to include any item with a scent, like lip balm, sunscreen, toothpaste, basically anything that is scented needs to go with your food to be stored. And some of the most popular method for storing your food is hanging a food bag. This is the lightest weight option out there. But I will say that even in a forest full of trees, that it can be difficult to find suitable branches on those trees in order to hang a bag properly. So if you practice this, I think it gets easier over time, but it definitely takes a little bit of time to find that, perfect scenario. And ideally you would have your food 10 to 12 feet off of the ground and at least 5 to 10 feet away from the trunk of a tree because a bear could get to it otherwise. So sometimes that's tricky. And bear canisters, like I mentioned, are required in some areas. I say they're more convenient than hanging food because once you've had to deal with carrying in this heavy, bulky item, then yeah, it's more convenient to have it there. I don't store these in my tent. They should be stored away, like 100 feet at least away from your tent. So in case they attract something, it's not coming to your tent looking for it. But Also, if you need one, if it's required at a lot of ranger stations will have these for you to rent. So you don't necessarily have to buy one, although a lot of times the ones that they have tend to be heavier than ones that you can buy. And then this is my favorite method, the Ursack bear bag. This is made from basically bulletproof material. It weighs a lot less than a bear canister, but weighs more than a food bag. And the difference between this and a food bag is you don't have to hang this as high. So a lot of times I actually just put this around the trunk of a tree. And while a bear could smash your food inside it to smithereens if it really wanted to, it won't be able to get the food out if you close this properly. And that's really what storing your food is all about. It's not necessarily protecting it for you to eat because you will survive, but it's protecting wildlife from getting to that food, getting accustomed to getting food from humans, and then becoming a problem and having to be dealt with. So in order to protect wildlife, we really need to do a good job of storing our food properly. In some places, especially national parks, I love it when they've got things like bear wires and bear boxes available. So this photo is bear wires in the Olympic National Park that they provide. And in this case, you can use your lightweight food bag and then just hang your food up high and it's safe. And then this is an example of bear boxes in the North Cascades. And in this location, they actually have a separate cook area that they require everyone to cook in. Instead of everybody cooking in their own camp area, they want everybody going to this one place to keep all of the smells just in one place because this area was really known for bears. So that's why it's important to check the regulations for where you're going and know what there is, know what you're going to need to deal with in terms of storing your food properly. So now I'll go over some common backpacking mistakes, and notice I didn't say beginner because these are all things we all do. And I think it's a great way to learn is by learning from mistakes. So probably one of the biggest can be unfamiliarity with your gear before a trip. So I would highly recommend, practice setting up your tent, know how to use all of your gear. This is an example of, I got a brand new tent. This is not a freestanding tent in any way whatsoever. It uses trekking poles, and yet I was still able to test it out in my basement using some hand weights. So that way I knew what I was doing when I got out there and I could set it up for real. And then this is me testing my water filter at the beginning of a season, because when they sit from one year to the next, in between trips, sometimes they'll be really dry and they'll need to be used before they can really function properly again. And so there's two photos here because with my DIY gravity setup, I am filtering on the left and I'm back flushing that filter on the right just by reversing the bags, which is really handy to have a system like this. You can collect your dirty water and then let gravity do the job of filtering it. And then when it's time to clean your filter, you can again let gravity do that job for you just by flipping the bags around. And this works with certain types of filters like a squeeze filter. This one is the Hydro Blue, but it also works with all of the Sawyer squeeze type filters. Carrying gear you don't need. That's a pretty common backpacking mistake. It's important to carefully consider every single item that goes into your pack and learn what you need and what you don't need, which you will over time, especially when you get back from a trip. Pay attention, make note, what did you use, what didn't you use, except for things that you should always take, like your first aid kit and a rain jacket, things like that. Otherwise, if you didn't use it, then you probably don't need it. A lot of people talk about packing their fears, and that's worrying about, well, what if this or what if that? And while it's smart to be safe and take what you need to be safe, you'll end up carrying too much if you end up basing too much of the what ifs on what you choose to take with you. So I'd be careful about that. I have a blog post about how to lighten the load of your backpack on my site. So you can learn how I went through that process myself. Sometimes it's about replacing gear. Sometimes it's about leaving gear at home, just not taking as much. So it can vary. Another important thing that happens is forgetting something, especially something like maybe your tent poles or your sleeping bag or just anything like that you're going to miss a lot. So I like to create a custom pack list. I know there's a lot of pack lists out there on the internet, but the problem with them is they don't necessarily have the same gear I'm using, and so it's not as helpful to me. And so I like to make a list of my own and then check it before I go, and then just, learn how to roll with it, learn how to be flexible. Things happen, you forget stuff. Like, I forgot a fork or a spoon on a trip, and so I'm using my Leatherman multi-tool pliers to eat. Or I forgot tent stakes, and that's a stick standing in as a stake. It can work. Not the most ideal, but the trip wasn't ruined because I forgot that. Certainly would have been nicer, but if you remain flexible, a lot of times you can deal with things that you forget. Okay, intestinal distress. So you may have heard of people getting giardia or other types of things like that on backpacking trips. And so I think there's two main sources for that. Number one is filtering your water. Preferably, you're finding a moving water source. So if it's coming from a lake, then maybe find the outlet to the lake where there's moving water. But if there isn't any and it's a lake, that's fine. Just filter it or boil your water or purify it, whatever you need to do. But I have to say, I've read that more commonly, the problem is that people aren't washing their hands often enough, especially after using the bathroom. So the next time somebody passes around the bag of snacks, instead of sticking your hand in there, just kind of shake stuff out into your hand so that everybody's not passing around anything like that. And then hopefully you can avoid this situation, which I've never had a problem with, but I know people who have, and giardia is not something that is fun to get. So that's why it's important to do these two things. And there I am collecting water on a trip, getting ready to filter. Improper footwear. So problems with your feet, like blisters, is a really big issue for some people. Your feet really take a lot more impact when you're backpacking versus hiking, obviously from the load you're carrying on your back. So it's really important to try out your shoes or boots on day hikes before you backpack, but also try them out with a little bit of weight on there so that you know if it's going to be sufficient for you. And if you start to feel a hot spot or anything that's kind of bugging you, stop and deal with it immediately. If you feel like something's rubbing and it's starting to be a little bit sore, if you stop and you deal with it, then you can probably avoid a blister that could potentially end your trip for you. So I think that getting proper footwear that fits you, and I highly recommend getting shoes that are at least a half size too big, because if your toes can feel the end of your shoe, they're too small. Your feet will swell when you're backpacking, and you need room for your toes to move around so they're not hitting the front of the shoe and causing problems. I really like trail running shoes better than hiking boots, but everybody has different needs when it comes to footwear. Everybody needs to try out what's best for them. Some of my friends really love the heavier hiking boots. I just don't. I really love I wear mesh trail runners most of the time so that I can just walk through water and just let the water drain out. I find that's a lot easier for me than dealing with teetering on rocks or logs or things like that when I can walk through water. Or when it's really wet and rainy or snowy, then I like to wear waterproof trail runners. Okay, not bringing a map and or not being familiar with the area. This relates right back to what we talked about earlier in terms of a really essential skill, which is always bringing a map, but just bringing a map isn't enough. You really need to be familiar with it, because I've seen a lot of people pull out a map and they'll be like, well, I've got a map. And it's like, all right, but what does it mean? Do you know where you're at? Do you know where you're going? So it's really important to study that ahead of time and really understand a lot about the land. Just by looking at the map, you can do a lot of that. I like to look at a map and see what all of the entry and exit points are. So if there's an emergency, let's say a wildfire breaks out in between where you're camped and the trailhead where you came in, and you need a different less stressed out about that if something like that should happen. And I also think that going over maps with an entire group, so people aren't relying just on one person to be in charge of knowing where they're at and being like the trip navigator. I really believe everybody should have this skill who goes backpacking, and it's easy to get separated from people. And so if you can take care of yourself by knowing where you're at, I think that'll be really, really helpful. Not checking the weather for where you'll be. So what that means is, let's say I'm in Portland and I'm going to go to Mount St. Helens, but I just looked at Portland weather and I didn't pay attention to what was going on where I'm actually going. You could end up in a completely different situation than what you're expecting. Probably colder. Who knows? Could be stormy. So I really like to use NOAA forecasts, pinpointed on the location. And then I also like to look at forecasts for nearby towns. So here is a NOAA forecast for a particular place in, I believe this is Goat Rocks. And this, you can point right on that map to the exact location you're going to be. And if you've studied your map, then you should be able to look at the map here on NOAA and get closer to where your camp area is, so you can click on that. And then notice underneath there where it says elevation, it's down in this area underneath the map where you pay attention to the elevation, and not up higher on the page where it says a different elevation, because this is what the forecast is based on. And then I also like to look at a nearby town. And in this case, Welch's, I was close enough to the Salmon River Canyon where I was backpacking for me to look at the weather there, because sometimes NOAA might not have some of the same details that a regular weather source might have. And so I like to look at a combo of things before I go on trips. And then I have a much better idea of what to expect when I'm out there. Okay, another common backpacking mistake is overestimating what you can do based on what you can do hiking. So I like to take an easier approach on the first couple of trips until I determine what I can really do with a backpack, because it is completely different. It might be a hike I've done many, many times, but when I put my backpack on and do it, it feels completely different. It's harder. It definitely gets easier over time, but I think this is a problem that newbies get into. Is, maybe they've done a 10-mile, 3,000-foot gain hike and it's no big deal, but throw the backpack on and try and do it, and suddenly they're like, wow, I don't know if I can do this. So I think that's a common mistake that's easily avoided if you just understand the difference. Storing food improperly. We've kind of already talked about this a little bit. I'd also say it's generally not a good idea to store food in your tent or on the ground. And most of the food issues that I've seen aren't bears. I've never had a situation where bears have gotten into food, and I don't know of many situations personally. I've certainly read about some, but the bigger problems are what we call mini bears. It's mice mainly, and ground squirrels, chipmunks, marmots, any of the little critters who will chew a hole right through your tent or your backpack if they can smell even an empty food wrapper. Yes, that has happened on trips. One of my friends got a hole in her tent and a hole in her backpack by a mouse who smelled an empty trail bar wrapper in the pocket of her backpack. And so that's why it's another reason it's important to store your food properly is because of mini bears. That's an Ursack, a regular bear bag, and some bear canisters on a backpacking trip in an area where there are a lot of mice, and they're definitely a problem. Setting up a tent in less than ideal conditions. And by less than ideal, I don't just mean for you, I also mean less than ideal for wildlife in the area and or for the place itself. So it's really important to choose campsites whenever you can that are previously used, meaning the land has already been impacted by somebody camping there. It's a durable surface like duff or dirt or sand or even gravel surfaces, preferably not vegetation. Some hard grasses can certainly take that a lot easier, but definitely not wildflowers or vegetation like that. And also avoiding low spots. Like if it was going to rain overnight and you were in a low spot, you might wake up in a big puddle inside your tent. And that has happened to some people I know. So pay attention to where water drainage might happen. And then your proximity to water or trails. Ideally, you're going to be away from the water or the trail by at least 100 feet. And this helps protect wildlife, for one, because they need access to water. And a lot of them get that access at night, not necessarily during the day. And you don't want them going through your camp. So that's another reason it's a good idea to to set up your camp in a better location. This is my tent in the Olympic Peninsula in the Enchanted Valley, and it's easy to see where previously a tent had been, and where I could easily set mine up versus in the green plant area. So always look for just any spot like this that's an existing site whenever you can. Not using low impact practices is something it's not necessarily a big mistake, although it definitely has a bad impact on a lot of us. Two most common ones I'd say are not or trash basically and human waste. Nobody likes seeing either one. It's really gross. It's actually a health hazard if it's human waste. But there's a lot more to low impact practices than just these two items. There are 7 leave no trace principles. I would highly recommend that you go to their website. It's lnt.org to learn more about them. But the 7 are plan ahead and prepare. A lot of the idea behind this one is that if you're not really prepared or you didn't have a good plan, then you may end up in a situation where you need to set up your tent in a less than ideal location, for example, because you didn't put enough thought into your trip plan. And that's just one case of why that is on the Leave No Trace site. And travel and camping on durable surfaces, like we just talked about. And that isn't just for camping, it's also for hiking. Disposing of waste properly seems like an easy one, but I think we've all seen trash out there. That includes taking care of your human waste and packing out toilet paper and hygiene products, and also your impacts on water and your wastewater from like washing dishes and things like that. Not doing any of those things directly in a water source, getting the water going away from them and doing those things there. And then minimizing campfire impacts, leaving what you find, respecting wildlife. And a big one is being considerate of other visitors. That's another great low impact practice. So like I said, I highly encourage everybody to learn more about all of these. I think if everybody did these, then there would be nothing to complain about out there about what other people are doing that don't make it a great experience for the rest of us or for animals or for the places that we go. A big mistake, this could actually be a really, really big one, is not letting somebody know where you're going and when you'll be back. So let's say that something happens to you on a trip. If you haven't left your trip plan with anybody, then who knows where you're at? Who knows when to expect you back? How long is it going to take for anybody to contact authorities to try to find you? So I like to leave all this info at home with a trusted person, but I'll also add another side of this is make sure that you're clear enough on your plan that that person doesn't end up calling search and rescue unnecessarily. This is a form that I like to use, and this form is available on my website under my trip planning 10 steps post that I mentioned earlier. This is a downloadable PDF form that you can fill out. And I like to leave all this info that includes everything from, if you haven't heard from me by this time and day, then call search and rescue. And I don't make this the same day that I plan to get back. I make it at least one day later because I should be able to deal with another night that I hadn't planned on before I need search and rescue to come in, just in general, unless something bad happens, in which case I'm dealing with that myself using my inReach device. But in general, I like to leave info about the trail I'm going to, the trailhead, where's the general location. I'll go ahead and provide info about the ranger station and the phone number, my estimated date and time of return, my general trip itinerary, and then I'll list the other people who are going with me and their mobile numbers just in case something happens and someone needs to get a hold of other people. And I'll even include the vehicles that are at the trailheads and the license plates, because that is really helpful to search and rescue. That way they know if you're still at a location, if you still need assistance. It would be really helpful to them to know that. And then last, I have just a couple of trip ideas for beginning trips. These are all trips that I've done except for June Lake at Mount St. Helens. So I've tried to include some things that are all in this general area, including around Mount Hood and the coast, Mount Adams, the Olympic Peninsula has some really nice rainforest options. And then there's a couple of places in Goat Rocks that are, I think, that are easy enough for beginners to moderate backpackers to get started. So these are just a couple of ideas of places that to go to. And then another thing that I like to emphasize is that all of these places that we get to go to, we're really lucky that we have them. I moved here from the Midwest where there's very little public land. And so that's one of the reasons I'd never hiked or backpacked, because there aren't that many places to go. And so here on the West Coast, we're super, super lucky to have what we do have, but it doesn't all take care of itself. And so I support all of these organizations as a member. And that's one great way to give back, is to become a member or to do trail maintenance, anything that you can do to help out and support all the places that we love to go. One of the things that I do instead of trail maintenance is I donate my time. So for Washington Trails Association, I create maps for their magazine that they put out quarterly, and that's something they would have to probably pay somebody for otherwise. And so I'm helping them, save money on that by donating my time. And instead of something like trail maintenance, that's what I like to do. But I think it's possible for everybody to find a way to give back, even if you don't have a lot of money to give or you don't have a lot of time. I think if you're creative about it, you can find ways to do that. And that's it for my presentation. So I'm ready for Q&A.
Thank you, Lisa. That was great. Everyone, if you have questions, go ahead and put those in the chat box. We do have a question. Do you have any advice for backpacking with kids?
Oh, well, I've never taken kids backpacking, but in general, I'd say really know what they're capable of and choose something really easy, just a couple miles in, and maybe take along some things that would be fun for them, whether that's, like a favorite stuffed animal or a game or something, or special foods that, they'll be excited about, and let them carry part of it. And I would probably encourage teaching them a little bit about, like, you're filtering water. What are you doing? How do you do that? Things like that. So sorry, I don't have a lot more than that to share.
Have you ever tried hammock camping? And if so, which is better, tents or hammocks?
Totally a personal preference. I know people who love their hammocks. I like tents. I like having all of my gear with me. I like having it all laid out. And I just like the tent. I don't think that for me a hammock would work, but I know a lot of people who just would not sleep on the ground. They say they just can't get comfortable and they really, really prefer their hammock setup. I would say, look at the full setup that people use for hammocks, which would include maybe top quilts as well as under quilts, because hammocks can be a little bit cold. And then potentially, a bug netting and or a tarp to go over it for full protection. So yeah, it's not something I've tried, but some people, they swear by it.
And then do you have any advice for single women backpacking? I'm guessing what was meant by that is maybe hiking solo.
I would assume that's what's meant by that. And solo backpacking is not something that I personally have done. I think because for me, mainly a lot of the experience is about being with other people. And then I just also like the safety of being in a group so that if something happens, I can deal with that. However, I do know a lot of people who do solo backpacking and they love it. And I think that it can be completely safe for women. I think the main things are just, listen to your instincts, know what you're doing, get comfortable with your gear, and give it a try on something that you're really comfortable with, an area you're pretty familiar with, that you can just give it a try, see how you do. Maybe don't go in too far, just to see how it goes. In general, I don't really worry about being a woman out there. I think that there's a lot that is targeted to us in terms of fear mongering that I don't believe in. I think that we're a lot stronger and more capable than a lot of us believe. And so I think just believe in yourself and give it a try.
Could you provide some tips on hygiene, like washing hands and brushing your teeth? Is filtered water needed? Do you have a wet towel that you will need to dry?
Okay, yeah, so hygiene. Yeah, I like to do what I call our sponge baths in my tent. So I'll use either wipes, or I'm trying to get away from using disposable items because then that's just more trash I have to pack out. So I take really small pack towels and I just use, if I'm just washing my body, it doesn't have to be filtered for me. Brushing my teeth, yes, I always use filtered water for brushing my teeth because it's going in my mouth. And so I want that to be clean filtered water. But I just do a simple, I don't even always use soap. And if you do use soap, biodegradable soap, the reason I don't usually use soap is because then I'd have to do this twice. I'd have to, use the soap and then I'd want to get the soap off of me. But it is a really good idea to wipe off all of the dirt and the sweat that you get on your body during the day, because it can impact you on the trip. So like if you got really sweaty, that could leave salts on your skin and that could lead to chafing and or irritation and or rashes, any of those things. And so it's a good idea to do that. It also really helps protect your sleeping bag will stay cleaner if you clean yourself before you get in it. Um, as far as brushing your teeth, whenever I brush my teeth, when it comes time to spit out the water, I like to do what is called like a rainbow, where you're like spreading that out as far as you can. So I mean, it's kind of dramatic, just like and kind of spread that out away from your camp, away from your tent a little bit, because toothpaste is scented, and so you're going to want to do that away from your camp just a little bit. But if you can, instead of just leaving it all in one little pile, spread it out, then that helps protect the area. Other hygiene tips I think are, I don't take things like deodorant. I take very few toiletries, actually. I take as few as I possibly can because I don't like to carry too many things, and I don't take deodorant. Deodorant's a scented item. I don't want to smell like perfume out there. I don't want anything attracted to me. I don't mind, for me backpacking, yeah, I'm going to smell bad. It's like big deal. It's okay. But I don't like to be really dirty. So I do like to stay clean. I like to change into clean socks for sleeping. And so one of the very few things I'll take extra of are socks and an extra pair of underwear. So it's pretty easy to wash one pair and let it dry. And then you always have a clean pair if you just have two pair and you just switch them out every other day. So I hope that answers questions about hygiene.
We have two questions along the same line here. Any groups you recommend? And then also, do you know good websites for Portland area backpackers to find others to go with?
So I found most of my backpacking friends through Meetup. Um, and I was actually a hike leader on Meetup when I met most of them. I think it's one of the really great ways. I think there's a lot of other organizations in town, like there's the Mazamas who lead hikes, and sometimes just going on group hikes, you'll get to meet people who hike a lot. You'll probably meet a lot of people who backpack. That's actually how I got into it, was through Meetup, going on hikes with all of these women that I was going with. I would hear about their backpacking trips, and that was a great way to meet people. I can't think of much outside of, besides Meetup, and then organizations like the Trails Club of Oregon. I guess that's another one, or Mazamas. I think the Audubon Society does some group hikes, things like that. I think in general, that's probably the best way to find people. The question about groups, I think same thing. That's how I got started. I don't do stuff through Meetup anymore. I think I met enough people who like to go that I just plan trips myself, within a small group of friends. And then sometimes they'll want to bring a friend, and then I'll meet somebody new who'll get to join, and I'll hear about other groups that they belong to. And so it's kind of a small world kind of a thing. Once you start meeting people in that area, there's a lot of crossover, and probably a lot of people know each other. But yeah, that's how I would get started.
Tell us more about your InReach device.
Okay, so an InReach is a portable location beacon, also known as a satellite communication tool. And so The inReach is the one that I recommend the most because it has both the SOS capability where there's a button that you can press on there if something happens and you need help, and it will send directly to search and rescue. It will send a message to them along with your exact location on a map. And then you'll be able to communicate with them. You'll be able to send messages back and forth using the inReach. You might need to use your phone to type. A lot of them will have an app. The inReach has an app that you can pair to your phone so it can make typing easier, but you don't have to do it that way. You can use the inReach itself. It's a bit more of a pain having to toggle on it, but I also like it because you can pull weather reports on it. And I use it. I've never had to use the SOS function, but I text my husband every day when I'm on a trip just to tell him, like what we're doing, that I'm fine. I have some preset messages on there that don't count against my monthly limit. When you buy these devices, you pay for the device and then you have to pay a monthly service fee, which they have different tiers based on that. And I use the least expensive one. You can send as many of the preset messages as you want, and it never counts against I'm under the 10 message a month plan. And so my presets will be things like, I'm at the trailhead getting ready to hike in, or I'm at my destination and I'm doing fine, or I'm back at the trailhead heading home. And I want them to all be good things because I want to use these on a regular basis just to touch base, because the bad things don't happen that often. And I'm just trying to give somebody peace of mind. And so that's why I like to use those. But then if something does happen, then you can just freeform text anything you want to using them. And you can also set up a couple of other presets that are, I can't remember what they call them, that you can send. And another feature is if there's more than one person who has an inReach on a trip, then you can communicate with each other. These devices do not require cell service in order to work. They use satellites to communicate. Sometimes once in a while, the satellite connection might take some time. I've never had one just completely fail on me with the inReach, but anytime you're in like a deep canyon surrounded by canyon walls in a forest and it's raining, that's like the worst possible scenario. Messages are going to take a little longer. When you are in an alpine area up high and you've got direct connection to satellite, then they work really fast. So if something really bad were to happen and it's just not sending fast enough, then you just need to get to yourself to a spot where your device has a clear view of the sky. And so maybe you have to hike a couple of miles to reach that location for that message to send, only in case you're having trouble with it. Most of the time I don't have issues, but they're really great for peace of mind and for safety. And I've used them to check weather and find out that thunderstorms that were not in the forecast before I left are now in the forecast. And so we've hiked out a day early when it looked like it was going to be a pretty bad storm. And so I was really happy to have that. Or I've had some of my friends communicate with some of their family back home. Maybe there was something going on they needed to keep track of. And so it just gave them a lot of peace of mind, just being able to communicate with somebody. So I think they're really great for that. And in a worst case scenario, they're fantastic for that SOS capability.
Okay, that's it for questions. So thank you everybody for coming, and thank you, Lisa, for an excellent presentation. You packed in a lot of great tips in an hour. That's very impressive.
Thanks.
So thank you again. We look forward to your next book. And once again, everyone, you can get a copy of the backpacking book from the library or your nearest bookstore. And have a great evening, everybody.